the thing about like when Abe gets that dose of information, what he's getting is the download of the true history of the world. And I say this because I'm going to veer a couple of directions. We'll come back to Abe and passing out, and I won't forget. Okay. The Here's what we know about history. Empire conquers and burns libraries. Then what it does is build museums in remembrance of the lie that they need to sustain. That's pretty much everywhere. And people go, oh, that's ridiculous. The Smithsonian would never do it. It's like, shut the fuck up. You have no idea what you're talking about, you know? Like, people are really, that's one of our willful ignorances that we're taught, that somehow museums hold integrity of truth. But they're really built by the empire that just burned down the library that they didn't want you to know. And I'm putting it into kind of black and white terms, but, you know, for the sake of discussion. And so what would the idea of the true history of the world look like? And who might have this? And this is something that's interesting about indigenous cultures, because they had oral histories. And I watched the documentary one time. It was called the Elder's Warning. The older brother's warning. And it was just to veer off for a second, I think it's relevant, but it was, they found a tribe in I think it was in Brazil, but it was South America. They found a tribe that they thought had been genocided by the Spaniards 500 years ago. It was still surviving in the Andes, in the high Andes. And this tribe was probably as shamanic in indigenous culture as you could get, in terms of they walked with the spiral of life as they saw it, as spiritual creatures. And I was listening to the shaman. What happened was this tribe noticed, this is how it got discovered, is they taught one of their own, or sent him out to learn Spanish, because they were still speaking an indigenous dialect. And they sent him to find the BBC and tell the world their warning. Their warning was, just out of interest, was that there was no longer the same snow caps building up on the mountaintops, and they were up high in the Andes, but they could still see, and no one knew when they were there, and they could still see these cities of like 20 million people below. And there's a number of cities in South America that a lot of people have never heard of, but they have 20 million inhabitants, right? So they were like, you do realize you're not going to have water. And so they taught one of their own to learn Spanish, and then go into the real, the industrialized world, and find someone that could report this warning that they have for the rest of us. And they called themselves the Elder Brothers because they felt like we were the younger brothers, the young, naive. The rest of the world had not retained their wisdoms. But this was this is the real clincher, this was a oral tradition. They didn't have writing. And I was watching this guy who was their present top shaman, and he was telling the story of how the Spaniards murdered them. But this was 500 years earlier. But he had heard it from voices of people that heard it from voices. And so I don't think he ever heard the story where it wasn't told to him in authentic tears. Because as he told the story again, he starts crying. He goes, how could they? How could they? And he's crying to something that happened 500 years ago. And I was like, if you read the book, you probably wouldn't feel the way he internalized it. But through oral tradition, more than just information is conveyed. Like the emotional energy is conveyed. And when you watch this man talking about what happened and watching how it affected him, he looked like an actual witness to the events. And that triggered my idea. I was like, what if we could see the real history of the world through the minds of those who experienced it, through their memories? And that led me on another discovery, where I found that there was a lot of Tibetan monks that had died. They did this on purpose, right? They basically felt like they reached the end of their time, and now they died in a meditative position. And they remain that way, and they become mummified that way. And it's a weird thing, because normally they shouldn't just mummify, you should decay. But they didn't. And some of them would later, like, you thought you were buying they thought they had found like porcelain sculptures of Buddhas in a monkey meditation porcelain, and then they X-ray them, and there's a person inside that the porcelain was built around. And this was and when you find these bodies in this meditative state, the Tibetans would be like, don't take them away, and don't cut them up, because they're still connected. Their mind, their soul is still out there, and they have transcended, but they're still connected to this body. So don't destroy the body. And I was like, wow, if we extrapolated on that and said, well, what if throughout history there was a group that was retaining these sort of monk-like memories, and they were doing it in another environment that I think the area where you saw that, Abe, that's the catacombs, and it's the most secret place in the world on Oddworld. And what Abe is getting is the download of the memories from these thousands of monks that have died and retained their memories in this hive of knowledge. And you have to be qualified. You have to have the key to get the download. And Abe almost has the key because he has the scars of the two previous trials, but the next trial is with these sleeches in this game, right? So in Abe's Exodus, they were the fleeches, because this is like the larvae state, and that was like after they were grown state. So that's how it justified it. But the idea being that if you could see the actual history, your mind would be completely blown, because it's not what we've been taught, right? So what I wanted to do was two things. I wanted to show the impact of that possibility and set up the stage of the condition of the environment where this might happen as a download. Like, if you could download the truth of the history of the world as seen by a lot of the witnesses and the victims, rather than as told by the museums that retained the authorities' message, then how impactful would that be? And what did he learn? And so for this game, I was like, he's going to get that download, and it's going to absolutely shatter him. And it's going to shatter a lot of his innocence, even though he's been through hard things and he's killed, and, he's the beginnings of the leader of a revolution. What would it impact him, and what would we think happened? And that's where I came away with, I think I want to leave it a complete mystery what he learned, but it's so devastating, it just shatters him. And all he really does is he picks out a few crown jewels that he's willing to communicate. Like, I know where our mother is, but I don't know why she left us there. And by the way, she's all of our mothers. I just wanted to plant these big idea seeds, and hopefully, we get to keep on telling the story. But in Soulstorm, it was that chance to sort of get more into the that epiphany, that zone of existential, like, where it's so overwhelming. What do we do now? Like if we're really up against this, it's kind of like what I've heard a lot of game founders, game company founders say, which is, if I had any idea how hard it was, I never would have did it. and I'm in that camp too. Like, it's and not just to be whiny, but it's kind of a warning to people, like, this is really hard stuff. And, it can dominate your life. Like, we've been involved with filmmaking. Filmmaking is a lot easier than products that people play but are trying to push the latest in computer chip technology. It's a good way to summarize it. And so anyway, that was the setting of the catacombs. And the idea was that Abe gets to see the truth of the history, and all we get to know is that it's so horrible and terrible. And so I didn't want to focus on that. I just wanted to show the impact on Abe and have it be sort of like, okay, he just grew up a little more. Now, how is it going to affect him going forward? And why was it only him that could have done it? And it wasn't that it was, and he was foretold to have done it.